Yo, what is going on, everyone? My name is Nick, or the Notorious Fantasy. In today's video, I'm bringing you guys my early busts at the wide receiver position for fantasy football in 2021. Now, these guys could completely change by the time drafts are going down late August or early September. So if you're thinking, hey, I'm watching this, it's August, maybe you should check out a more recent version of this, because I will make this as the offseason goes on. I will make a couple of these so you guys get an idea of how my brain is moving and shifting throughout the offseason. In this video, I'm going to be talking about three guys that, based upon where they are going right now in current fantasy football drafts, I just want nothing to do with. Now, there is another wide receiver that I talked about in the players I dislike video from a couple of days ago. I talked about a quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end that I'm going to be fading in fantasy football in 2021. So there is another wide receiver that is not going to be on this list, because I figured, why would I want to talk about a guy that some of you guys have already heard about? So if you guys do end up enjoying this bust wide receiver video, please make sure to hit that subscribe button down below. Not only is it free, I put out content every single day talking about fantasy football, talking about the NFL draft, and talking about football as a whole. So if you're a football fan, you like the NFL, make sure you hit that subscribe button down below, and let's get into it. At number one here, number one on my bust list, to be honest with you, this is in no particular order. I like all these guys. Not that much, and I feel like they are going to be down tremendous when it comes to their 2021 fantasy football production. First guy up, Odell Beckham Jr., wide receiver of the Cleveland Browns, currently coming off the board as wide receiver number 26. Now, I know there's definitely rumors that Odell may end up getting traded, and if that's true, I might actually like Odell a little bit more. I'm pretty down on Odell Beckham Jr., not based upon the injury last season, but based upon how this offense is just so much more run heavy in Kevin Stefanski's system, and that it seems like the offense was running much more effectively once they got rid of Odell. Once Odell ended up getting hurt, this offense was fucking buzzing all the way through the playoffs. They almost beat the Kansas City Chiefs. I mean, obviously Patrick Mahomes ended up getting hurt, but still, they were playing unreal Browns football, the best Browns football a majority of you people have ever seen, because unless you're like 7,000 years old, the Browns have never been good in your lifetime. Odell Beckham Jr. played in 7 games in 2020 as wide receiver number 89 in PPR, 85.5 PPR, and wide receiver number 75, finishing on the year in standard, which means he had 12.4 PPR points per game, 10.8 half PPR points per game, and 9.1 standard points per game. It might legitimately be easier to close your eyes and randomly pick up a wide receiver off the waiver wire who's going to score more points than Odell Beckham Jr. Last season, he only had 44 targets, 6.3 per game. For 23 targets, 3.3 per game. For 319 receiving yards, 45.6 per game. And 4 total touchdowns at a 15.4% touchdown rate, which is astronomically high for a guy getting 23 receptions. He had 4 touchdowns, which again, very high, as well as having the second highest weekly volatility rate at the position. He was a very volatile player. He'll have a big game, then the next week, the guy's fucking sleeping on his mattress. His nice, what are those called? Those water beds that people used to want? Sleeping on a water bed like that. And then the next week, this guy is rock hard, took like 3 things of Viagra, and he is going to blow the back out of the defense. Then the next week, he's sleeping again. So it's very, very inconsistent play from Odell Beckham Jr. in 2020. In 2019, when he played a full season, it was kind of a lot of the same. Getting a high amount of targets, 8.3 per game with 133, finishing 12th at wide receiver, 74 receptions, 4.6 per game, 18th at wide receiver for 1,035 receiving yards, 23rd at wide receiver, and only having 4 touchdowns, which means that he finished outside of the top 25 in PPR that season, even with having 12th most targets, even with having 18th most receptions. He just wasn't doing too much when he was catching the ball. And now, when Jarvis is healthy, when Chubb's healthy, when Kareem Hunt is healthy, I worry that Odell Beckham Jr. is not going to continue to get the targets that he was getting, because the team realized if Baker's spreading it out, if he's not just throwing it to Odell because he's Odell Beckham Jr., he is a much better passer. So, will Odell get traded? I don't know. Let me know down below what you guys think about this. Do you guys think Odell's going to play for the Browns in 2021, or do you think they're going to be looking to ship him away before the season begins? Next up is Juju Smith-Schuster, wide receiver of the Pittsburgh Steelers, currently coming off the board as wide receiver number 23. Now, with Odell, there's kind of just a little bit of talks about being traded with Juju. There's a 100%, or there's like a 50-50 chance that he's not even a Steeler in 2021 due to him being a free agent. So if he's a free agent and he goes to a better spot, I will be willing to cancel this and say, hey, you know what, I don't think he's going to be a bust. I wouldn't look to be fading him in the draft because I like him where he's at. But right now in Pittsburgh, it's the classic case of too many cooks in the kitchen, as well as the classic case of the wide receiver just not being what he was a couple of years ago. Juju finished the 2020 season playing in all 16 games, finished as wide receiver 16 in PPR, wide receiver 18.5 PPR, and wide receiver number 22 in standard. Now, the reason why I like to talk about points per game when it comes to fantasy football, running backs, wide receivers, quarterbacks, tight ends, is because season finish is the most skewed number in fantasy football. He finished as a top 16 receiver in PPR. Why is that? Not because of his game in, game out greatness. It was because the motherfucker played in every single game. If he missed a couple of games, you would have been down. You're down tremendous regardless because you drafted Juju, and he's only putting up 14.6 PPR points per game, 11.6 half PPR points per game, and 8.6 standard points per game. You're not very happy with that. So on a week in, week out standpoint, Juju's not a very good wide receiver, but when you close your eyes and you look at the end of the season, you're like, hey, Juju wasn't that bad. That is a narrative that you have to get out of your head. You have to not just look at where they finished. I talk about where they finished, but I also talk about their points per game because it's very important to notice differences in those numbers and why a number could be so skewed. Now, a wide receiver could finish as wide receiver 10 and have a fucking tremendous season, right? Played 15 games, blew the back out of the defense, and you're like, you know what, that was a top 10 wide receiver. But with Juju, when I'm looking at his games, I don't see top 16 wide receiver in PPR. He had 128 targets, 8 per game, ranking 15th at the position, 97 receptions, ranking 7th at wide receiver with just 831 yards. He turned 97 receptions into less than 1,000 yards, 51.9 yards per game, ranking 36th at the position for 9 touchdowns, which is 9th highest. And he fell out of the top 20 in points per game, so you have to understand that Juju really got carried by these touchdowns. If he's not scoring these touchdowns, if he's not catching these small dump-offs, that he's not able to break loose from the corners, the DBs, then what are you going to get from Juju in 2021? Probably similar production, but the upside is limited. Especially if Deontay Johnson really starts improving and is grabbing the ball, firmly grasp it like from fucking SpongeBob, because the motherfucker would hit his hand and would just fly off. If he had any hands at all, Deontay Johnson might be a top 10 wide receiver, and I really think Juju is going to be looking from the outside. Very sad, hitting the Corvette on TikTok. Final wide receiver of the video. If you guys have enjoyed, again, please make sure to subscribe. Mike Evans, wide receiver of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Now, he is going earliest out of all of these wide receivers, currently coming off the board as wide receiver number 17. Now, with Mike Evans, my biggest worry is nothing to do with skill set. Personally, I feel as though Mike Evans is one of the most talented wide receivers in the NFL, but I think if they bring Chris Godwin back, which all reports kind of seem like they are, what's going to happen with Evans? Godwin missed a bunch of games, so that really helped out Evans. Tom Brady, we all know this man loves to spread the ball out all over the field. He'll throw it to Scotty Miller. He will throw it to legitimately anyone with a pulse as long as they're open. He's not one of those guys that will see Mike Evans and just fucking pepper him 6,000 times, especially if Chris Godwin is back. Mike Evans finished as wide receiver 11 in PPR in 2020, 10.5 PPR, wide receiver 8 in standard. So I'm not going to go ahead and devalue Mike Evans' skill set because, frankly, again, I think he's one of the better wide receivers in the NFL. But at the end of the day, in this system, without Jameis Winston, it's going to be very hard for Evans and Godwin to be very good. And I just feel like we saw the best out of Evans with Brady thus far, or probably what he'll have for the next couple of years, because really, I don't think that Evans is going to really light it up like he did in 2020. He had 15.5 PPR points per game, 13.4 PPR points per game, and 11.2 standard points per game. Another scenario of a wide receiver who's good, but he plays 16 games, so he gets elevated a little bit higher. And he even had not top-tier targets, right? Or receptions, and still finished very highly at the position. He only had the 24th highest targets at the wide receiver position with 109, 6.8 per game, 1 off of being, or 0.1 off of being very nice. I like my name of Borat, having 70 receptions, 4.4 per game, ranking 27th at the position, and only having 989 receiving yards. 17th at the position. But homie scored 13 touchdowns, ranking 4th at wide receiver at a 18.6% rate. Very high. So, I feel like with Tampa Bay, Tom Brady really looking to air the ball out, spread it out between the guys. The fact that Evans had a very high touchdown rate. The fact that he didn't turn all these receptions into big yards is scaring me a little. I just feel like in Tampa Bay now, Evans is going to be fine, right? You're going to draft him, and you're not necessarily going to think, oh, this guy was a bust, right? Because you're going to draft him as like the 17th wide receiver, and you're okay with it, right? But there's not as much upside, at least in my opinion. I don't really see it anymore in Tampa with Tom, with Godwin healthy. Now, if Godwin doesn't return, I'm fucking throwing the kitchen sink, is what they say. Throwing the kitchen sink. Throwing everything at Mike Evans, because frankly, then I'm all bought in. Even if he's spreading the ball to these other guys, Godwin is such a fucking target sucker. He's like Kirby in Super Smash Bros. Just sucking the shit in like Mia Malkova. So let me be honest with you. If Chris Godwin is not back, if he's gone, if he's in Miami, hopefully with my Dolphins, then hallelujah for Mike Evans. But if not, I'm a little bit worried. I still do like Mike Evans, still think he's a talented player, but just not at that price for me, based upon what we know right now. So thank you guys all so much for watching this video. Let me know your guys' bust wide receivers down below. Let me know if you're like, Nick, you're a fucking idiot. I love Mike Evans next year, because Mike Evans, it wouldn't surprise me if a lot of people liked him. Why? Because he's so good. So thank you guys all so much for watching this video. Again, if you did end up enjoying, please make sure to hit that subscribe button down below. I love you all. Have a great rest of your guys' day, and I'll see you beautiful bastards in the morning on Saturday. As always, goodbye.